Good morning, and it is a nice morning this morning, and as you probably know, today is the 21st of September, which is my older daughter's birthday, which is why she's not on the seminar, but it's also the equinox, and that's very important for us because it's the last day of being able to get any vitamin D, and if it's a sunny day, you will get vitamin D at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock is midday, remember, because we haven't changed the clocks yet, until 1 minute past 1. Okay. There'll be 1 minute of vitamin D when the ultraviolet will be at about 230 nanometers, which will penetrate the skin deep enough to convert cholesterol into vitamin D. Okay. So remind me at the end of the morning that we all want to get that last minute on the last day. Okay. So every year for the last at least 25 years, I've done an annual update. And what we've tended to do is to do like a précis of the work that we've done during the year at the different seminars. So we've done some important seminars during this year on genetics and on cancer and on the chemistry of pain and on the emotions. And obviously issues arise as a result of that, whereby we can refine the work that we did and make it simpler and easier, which I'll be talking about. Along with some new concepts which we're chucking as we go along. And then tomorrow we'll be concentrating more, particularly in the morning, on the new work with the phonocardiography, which is quite revolutionary as far as work with the heart. I'm going to introduce a little bit of that this morning because I'm going to take what we did last year, which was very successful. Everybody liked the idea of, I'm getting a feedback here, of doing an introduction and treating a patient first of all, treating somebody, taking them through the protocol of what we'll be doing over the weekend, and then getting into the discussion about what we're doing. So we'll run through somebody, and then we'll do the detail of the different subjects that we're going to cover. Okay, so annual update. So these are the ones that we did during the last 12 months. Genetics, epigenetics, and biochemistry. That was the one we did in October of last year, and that went through a lot of old work, but it also introduced when you might consider using coenzymes, and this is quite important. When a coenzyme shows up with a person, it's often related to the fact they've got a single nucleotide polymorphism or a SNP. So if a person indicates that they need a coenzyme, then the chances are they've got a polymorphism in there, and you should consider whether this is something inherited. We looked in the springtime at epigenetics and cancer and came up with a protocol of how to look at patients with different types of cancer. In April, we looked at the chemistry of pain, so we studied what makes inflammation go, and particularly a lot of emphasis on hypoxia, lactic acid build-up. And then in the summer, we did anxiety and depression and looked at the difference between the two and the biochemical reasons for this. Now, over the summer, I've been reviewing some of the older literature on some of the more famous nutritionalists in the 1900s. And these are really the most influential people in the world of nutrition. And most of these are American, but McCarrison isn't. So the first one who probably was of influence in the world of nutrition was Harvey Wiley, who was the first Food and Drug Administration chairman in the United States. In the early part of the 1900s, about 1908, he was the first appointed person to look after the food and drug industry. And in those days, food was really, really important. It was part of it, and drugs were relatively small. And he was an advocate of whole foods. In other words, eating whole wheat products, whole grain products, and whole milk products, as we'll see. And at that time, they'd introduced the milling of flour, which meant the removal of the bran and the germ, so that the grain would last longer as stored food. And to make it last even longer, to preserve it, they fumigated it and added chlorine and other bleach compounds into it. And he was opposed to this and tried to pass it through the Senate, a law that forbid the chlorination of flour to preserve it, and they sacked him because the food industry was so big. Although the millers all agreed that it was an abhorrence to fumigate flour and to bleach it with chlorine, He then wrote a book and was very successful, and finally his rules went through the Senate and became law and were totally ignored. So the bleaching of flour continued on ever since. But he was the pioneer in the field. Weston Price in the 1920s and 30s was a dentist who wrote a book on nutrition and physical degeneration and was the first all over the world to study the occlusion of the different types of occlusion, of the type 1, 2 and 3 occlusions, and the build-up of the facial muscles and the jaw in people who lived in more traditional societies. And he found, first of all, there was an absence of dental caries in certain areas of the world where they ate raw food, and particularly when they ate raw cane sugar, and a better occlusion altogether with the facial structure and the size of the head. And so he was one of the first pioneers, and the Weston Price Institute still exists today. Robert McCarrison was the chief medical officer in India for the British when in the days of the Raj over there. And again, he studied the traditional villages in India and up in Kashmir, and he went up into the Hunza Valley. He was the first person to investigate the locals in the Hunza Valley and studied all the nutrition. He wrote a book on studies in the nutritional diseases, and he found in traditional societies where people ate whole foods, they didn't have the illnesses. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes were unknown in these people until they started introducing refined foods into their diet, and then they became affected in the same way as the Americans. Francis Pottinger is a physician, an endocrinologist who was studying before the days of cortisol, before cortisone was actually known, studying the effect of the adrenal glands on diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. And he was also very much into the Journal of Orthodontics and Oral Surgery, and although he was a medic, and he did his experiments, and we'll see the little film clip in a minute, on cats. Royal Lee was the founder of Standard Process and wrote many, many books. The Systemic Causes of Dental Caries. Again, Royal Lee was a dentist. Wrote some fine books. And Dr. Goodhart, who's the founder of Applied Kinesiology, took most of his early works from Royal Lee. Royal Lee passed on in 1967, but George took a lot of his nutritional work from there. So the traditional diets, which all these people suggested, are the ways to avoid our illnesses. And the modern illnesses, we covered a lot of these during the year, but the prime one, as we'll see, is heart disease, okay? Followed by cancer, followed by strokes, followed by diabetes, and with the extra added bonus for most people of arthritis, okay? And all these diseases were unknown in traditional societies and traditional diets. And the great question is, what is the difference? Once these people started eating Western food, in other words, processed food and denatured food, they started to develop the same symptoms. And interestingly, animals do exactly the same. And we'll look at Pottinger's cats in a minute, and I've seen evidence of Pottinger's cats around the neighbourhood, so you can tell all the cats who eat the wrong type of diet. So the traditional diets were foods from fertile soils. Pliny the Elder, who was the historian in ancient Rome, indicates that before 500 BC, Italy was a very fertile place, and then the Romans developed it, mass farmed, and then they started to need doctors. Before that time, there were no physicians. They got their physicians from Greece with Hippocrates and the founder of medicine from over there. But up until the time of Pliny in the late BCs and the early ADs, apparently they didn't need doctors because the soil was so fertile. They didn't have illnesses. So traditional diets tend to choose organ meats over muscle meats. And that's something which has really declined, isn't it? Not many people eat the heart, not many people eat liver or kidneys these days. In fact, they're quite difficult to get organic. You can usually get mass-produced, but if you see the way they look after the chickens and the lambs, and not so much the lambs, but certainly the cows and the pigs, you probably wouldn't want to eat the kidneys and the liver anyway with the food unless they are organic. But it's interesting that people used to eat the whole lot, you know, everything, and then they boil the bones up to get the collagen and the glue out of. They used to eat animal fats over vegetable fats. Their animals were reared on pasture rather than inside confinement, inside sheds. They had dairy products which were raw or fermented. Okay. They had grains and legumes. Often they were soaked or fermented. They made their bones, not their bones, the animal bones, into broths. And again, that gives you a lot of the minerals, a lot of the calcium, a lot of the nutrients for building our own bones. They used unrefined sweeteners such as honey, maple syrup, and later on would come the raw cane sugar and molasses. They had lacto-fermented vegetables. This would be sauerkraut and things to preserve foods. Lacto-fermented beverages, like yogurts, etc. Unrefined salt. So the salt had a lot more than just sodium chloride in it, and particularly if it was taken from the sea once the tide had gone out, or sea vats. They would use natural vitamins. They would have natural vitamins within their food. They wouldn't have to have added vitamins as we do in breakfast cereals and things to put in. You know, there is no vitamins in cereals which are refined. It's all been removed because it's not in the germ or in the bran. So consequently, you have to add them added. So they had natural vitamins in their food. They used traditional methods of cooking. They didn't have microwaves and cook things to destruction. And they ate seeds and had open pollination. Modern diets, on the other hand, are foods from depleted soil. Practically every soil in the Western world is depleted, and so they have to add artificial fertilizers to it. And very slowly it's getting more and more deficient, as we know. And this is why we find in our patients the same nutrients deficient all across the world. So everywhere where there's intensive farming, like in the UK, America, Australia, Russia, we find deficiencies of magnesium, don't we, and zinc. I think selenium is rapidly showing up there as being needed a lot as well, and iodine, although there's a bottomless pit of iodine called the sea, of course, if we could use more seaweed and sea fertilizers in it. Muscle meats, we tend to go very much more for muscle meats now, particularly the anti-fat lobby. You know, you cut the fat off everything and therefore it's just the muscle meats, and we eat much less organ meats. We use principally vegetable oils instead of animal oils. Most of these oils, as we discussed over the weekend, are absolute junk. Animals are in confinement, factory farming, etc., so they don't build up the right oils within their tissues. We know that cows, if they're kept indoors over the winter, build up much more omega-3, and if they're grass-fed. But if they're kept inside, then they get omega-6 oils much more than omega-3. We tend to pasteurize, this is very important, the dairy products, you know, as they've gone through a heating process, and we'll see exactly over the weekend how that denatures it. And you're all in for a treat, those who want to. We've got some unpasteurized milk for you to try at the break time, and some proper whole grain bread, freshly milled yesterday. Okay, so there's nothing stale in the bread there. Grains which are refined, and it's reckoned that when you mill flour, it will oxidize from the air and the light within between 1 week, and the longest would be 4 weeks. So you should replace your flour every 4 weeks. Most commercially produced flour is rancid if it's whole grain. So what they tend to do is refine the whole grain and make it into white flour, and they take the germ, as we're talking, the bran away, and that leaves just the endosperm or the starch. And that's a grey colour, and what they cook doesn't really want a grey flour, so they bleach it. So you've got the added bonus of having nothing in there apart from starch, and chlorinated compounds to bleach. If you leave the bran and the germ in, it will go rancid. Okay? So if you buy wholemeal or even 81% flour, and it is more than a month old, it's rancid. So you're taking in rancid oils. Most commercially produced flour doesn't have a date on it. It has a sell-by date, but not when it was manufactured. And most are well over a year, apparently. Okay? So when you buy a bag of flour in the shop, you're actually buying something which is rancid unless it's white. Okay? White is better in many ways, and some of you who are grain sensitive, like the red people, know this, that they can tolerate white bread better than they can tolerate brown. And that always interested me because we thought it was the lectin that irritates, but we now feel that it's probably the rancid oils. So the rancid oils within brown whole wheat flour if they're old, will cause more damage to a person than the lectin reaction of just blowing them up. But we'll look into that as we go along. So grains to make bread and cereals should be freshly ground. We add artificial flavourings to a lot of foods, MSG, aspartame, etc. Particularly, not quite so much here, but particularly in the US. You know, they've got masses of food, and it's really quite flavourless without adding a lot of salts and real artificial flavours to it. We have refined sweeteners. In other words, we refine our unrefined raw sugar down into white sugar, which bears no resemblance to the original substance. We can and freeze a lot of our vegetables. We have a lot of soft drinks, a lot of sodas, etc., which are laced with either phosphoric acids and sweeteners. We refine our salt is down to sodium chloride instead of having potassium chlorides and magnesium chlorides in it as well. We add synthetic vitamins to our cereals and other foods, supposedly to bring them up to levels of health. We microwave and irradiate our food in cooking, and we use hybrid seeds and genetically modified. So apart from that, you can see that the modern diet, you begin to despair because you think, well, how on earth does anybody get any nutrients from the modern diet? And you begin to see why people's body degenerates. And in years gone by, they didn't degenerate. So in years gone by, people used to die from infections, but they didn't die from these degenerative problems. And the first recorded heart attack, coronary thrombosis, coronary myocardial infarct in this country, was recorded in 1913. And the second was in 1917. Okay, so if we bear that in mind, something's happened in the last 100 years to have an effect on coronary health, which we'll see. So Dr. Goodhart was the founder of applied kinesiology, and he based most of his nutritional teachings on the researches of those pioneers. Obviously, there's hundreds of other pioneers in there, but I thought I'd just choose the ones that you might have heard quite famous. So I'm just going to show you this little clip, which is on YouTube, and because it really begins to make you think not about cats and animals, but you see it with cats and animals and other domestic animals. But the main thing is you see it with humans and what happens with the cats when they're on wonky diets.
Francis Pottenger at first followed in the footprints of his father. He and his staff continued to see tuberculosis patients as well as carry on in the research avenues that had shown some usefulness. But as chronicles of history so often express, the serendipities of science take unexpected twists. A phenomenon is observed quite by accident, which boggles the perspective and redirects new levels of creative inquiry. So it was for Dr. Pottenger. While working on his father's theory that tuberculosis was linked to adrenal gland deficiencies, he took on the task of standardizing adrenal extracts by using adrenalectomized cats. These were the steps required to standardize the biological extracts for later use with his tuberculosis patients. The cats chosen for the study were apparently in perfect health. They were kept in open-air pens with a yard 4 feet wide, 7 feet high, and 12 feet long. They were fed cooked meat scraps from the sanitarium, which included internal organ meats and bones, along with some additional raw milk and cod liver oil. According to all known standards, this diet provided an optimal amount of nutrients. The cats seemed healthy. The adrenalectomy technique had been proven appropriate. Nevertheless, the study suffered from an unexplainably high mortality rate. Then came that uncalculated twist of events. For some reason, many more cats were provided for the study than could ever have been fed using leftover cooked meat scraps from the sanitarium. So raw meat scraps from a nearby meatpacking plant replaced the cooked meat in the diets of certain cats. Within a very short period of time, the operative mortality rate of that group dropped significantly. The raw meat-fed animals began to survive the adrenalectomy extremely well, and they continued on in a superior quality of health. Pottenger had unexpectedly glimpsed a new facet of fundamental nutrition, and he was compelled to respond with a series of studies that would span the next 10 years of his medical career. To begin the study, a population of animals was selected which Pottenger aptly dubbed run-of-the-pen cats. He was not interested in physical perfection. His major concern was that his cats represent a normal sampling of animals, with the exception that cats with obvious deformities or disease were excluded. Needless to say, when people from the nearby community heard of the study, more cats were mysteriously abandoned on the Pottenger doorstep than could ever be used in the experiment. Pottenger was intrigued by what he termed heat labile factors. Or, put as an experimental question, he asked, does the cooking process somehow render food nutritionally deficient, causing eventual physiological degeneration? A basic diet was designed consisting of raw meat, viscera, bones, a small amount of raw milk, and cod liver oil. Each day, this basic diet accounted for 1/3 of the total dietary intake of the animals. The remaining 2/3 of the diet was the dimension of experimental manipulation. One group of cats received raw meat or cooked meat along with the basic diet. The other group of cats were given raw milk, pasteurized milk, evaporated milk, or sweetened condensed milk. Each cat's daily diet then consisted of 1/3 of the basic diet, plus 2/3 of the prepared food which was under study. And once assigned to a specific group, the animal's diet was held constant. Although there were two different studies, one focusing on milk and the other on meat, the results of both studies were nearly identical. Over the next 10-year period, Pottenger observed and recorded numerous physiological changes in the experimental animals and their offspring. First, you will observe the raw milk animals. They move about the pen with a great deal of agility and coordination. Notice the sheen to the fur and the normal sexual interest displayed toward the male in the next pen. As would be expected, they land on their feet when thrown in the air. The pasteurized milk-fed cats, shown here, move about the pen in a manner quite different from the raw milk cats. The cat in the foreground actually developed arthritis during the experiment. They are lethargic, much like animals in a zoo. When thrown a short distance, these animals show a slightly impaired sense of coordination. Dental deterioration was also common. Note the abscesses above the molars, the reddish cast of the gums, and the soft gingiva. With evaporated milk, there was even greater deterioration. When the study was begun, this cat was better developed than any animal shown thus far. The sweetened condensed milk-fed cats not only had their milk heat processed, but there was the addition of sugar. They are nervous animals. Again, there is marked deterioration in coordination and dental abnormalities. Notice particularly the abscesses and the purple tone to the membrane of the mouth. For a further comparison, here is another example of normal development. Notice the firm gingiva, the normal coloring tones, the beautiful broad mouth, the full jaw with obvious power. This animal happens to be a male, but the comparison is nonetheless valid. Here is another illustrative comparison. The raw milk female gets in 20 or 30 licks for every one of the pasteurized milk female, then leaps away in disgust. These were all first-generation animals, born of theoretically healthy parents, and who themselves were healthy at the beginning of the study. Disturbing as these observations might be, the impaired balance, the lack of energy, the dental deterioration, some of the most significant findings emerged as Pottenger extended his study down to the second and third generations. Almost immediately, Pottenger noticed that animals fed the raw meat diet for 2 generations appeared larger than the same generation of cooked meat cats. At 16 weeks, this second-generation raw meat cat weighs 2,000 grams, while the second-generation cooked meat animal only comes up to 1,600 grams. Compare the black kitten with this raw meat kitten, the sheen, the sparkle of the eyes, the well-developed face. Nutritional studies often look at skeletal development as a rather vital index of dietary sufficiency. This is a raw meat animal with the full, round face. A later examination of the skull showed a firmly developed zygomatic arch. The frontal sinuses were complete, and calcium content of the bones throughout the body ranged from 12 to 17% by weight. The skulls of adult cats with a long ancestry of raw food diets are surprisingly constant. Here we find the development of a second-generation cooked meat animal. The head has begun to flatten and is actually smaller than the comparable raw meat cat. The skull shows the major reasons for this change. The zygomatic arch is not completed. The nasal development is somewhat irregular, and the calcium content has fallen to 10%. Third-generation cooked meat animals show the most remarkable skeletal change. The skull is considerably smaller. It is flat with pointed features. The skull shows a poorly developed zygomatic arch. The bones are paper-thin and soft like sponge rubber. The frontal sinuses had developed in a peculiar fashion, and the calcium content of the bones had fallen to a low 3% by weight. Activity level is another index of interest. In this pen, there is an obvious difference in activity level between the raw meat animals and the cooked meat animals. One of these cooked meat kittens actually had a broken back resulting from a failure in development. Moving into the third generation of experimental animals, the degeneration was even more pronounced. The smaller animal is a cooked meat kitten and is actually the oldest of the 3. The kitten on the left is a second-generation raw meat cat, and the one on the right is a second-generation cooked meat cat. Here is a second-generation cooked meat mother with her third-generation offspring. She has a male body configuration. Her offspring developed nasal and ocular allergies. From this same litter came an asthmatic kitten, purportedly the first to be reported in the research literature. Again, there is marked dental deterioration, abscesses, poor coloring, and gingival irritation. Pronounced exhaustion was a typical observation among the third generation of cooked meat kittens, as well as impaired coordination. This third-generation cooked meat kitten had over 24 fractures, resulting from a failure in development. And finally, this little third-generation cooked meat kitten was unable to release its claws from the hardware cloth, and probably would have died had not the assistant taken it down. At this juncture in the study, a most interesting development emerged. The cooked meat cats were unable to successfully reproduce after the third generation. Most were void of sexual interests, and those that had attempted to mate could only produce stillborn litters. On the other hand, the raw meat animals continued to reproduce healthy offspring generation after generation. The notion that specific nutritional factors in food may be destroyed by heat processing is obviously not far-fetched. Physiological deterioration down the generations is quite graphic, and according to Pottenger, the process was found to be reversible only with great difficulty. He did demonstrate that the animals could make considerable gains towards physiological normalcy, but it took 4 generations of a raw food diet before the animals regained their native structure and original level of well-being. An interesting sidelight came 6 months after the experiment's conclusion, when volunteer weeds emerged in the fallow pens. In the raw milk pens, the plants flourished. In the pasteurized milk pens, the growth was somewhat less hardy. Plants in the evaporated milk pens struggled, and the sweetened condensed milk pen speaks for itself. At a later date, navy beans were planted in the respective pens, with parallel results. What are we to make of these numerous observations? I suppose one could easily slip into pessimism when translating these findings into terms of human deficiency. However, there are certain redeeming features that should be examined. From the beginning, the dietary intake of each animal was carefully controlled. Man is rarely restricted to such a high degree because he is omnivorous. Nevertheless, the changes discovered in the Pottinger cats are comparable to many like changes in human beings. The historical work of Dr. Weston A. Price corroborates the Pottinger study by charting the graphic degeneration of primitive tribesmen as they moved from their traditions and dietary customs to the civilized world. And if it is true with human beings, as it is with cats, that nutritionally caused deterioration is passed down the generations, a sobering challenge stands before us. Throughout this study, Pottinger stressed the high degree of dietary control he imposed on his laboratory animals. This is quite an accurate accounting of the facts, with the exception of the one cooked meat cat that somehow got away. Although she did undergo obvious degeneration during her captivity, later she was able to experience a partial physiological recovery while living in the wild. And any fitting epilogue would point out that she compensated in a rather fine manner and carried on in the genteel tradition of her feline ancestry.
Well, it's quite thought-provoking, isn't it? And I think if you want to watch it, it's on YouTube. That's where we got it from. And what, offspring from there? Yeah? What, fed raw meat and raw milk? Yeah. Well, the good thing is, looking at that, I've got a practice full of Pottinger's cats. They're called humans, but they all suffer the same disorders, don't they? They all suffer from the heart disease, the dental problems, the cancers and the arthritis and the diabetes, exactly that the cats did. But the good thing is, although we won't have to eat raw milk, eat raw meat, the rest of it we can implement into our diets and into our patients. So as I say, we're going to treat you a little bit to some proper whole grain bread to see what it's actually like, because most people have never tasted bread which has been freshly milled. And raw milk, most people have never tried raw milk unless you've lived on a farm or near a farm. So those two are very staple compounds and are full of a lot of nutrients that we discussed during the weekend, particularly the vitamins. Okay, so let's have a look now at the body types. Now, what I want to do, you've got a booklet which Clive very kindly gave. Clive, did you give them both? Did they get the professional one as well as the patient one? Oh, they're coming out after the break. Okay, so there is the two booklets. One is for your patients, because patients are interested in knowing. And what we did is we took out the biochemistry, etc., the tough stuff in there. And then there's the patient, that's the patient one, and then there's the real one for you and practitioners. These will be also available on the website, so you can download them yourself, okay, and make them up into books. So you don't have to purchase the books, but they come free of charge, don't they? Yeah. We're working on that one. Okay. I'm jumping the gun, obviously. But in there's some nice pictures which Gary has drawn. These pictures don't actually refer to anybody in particular. So what I want to do is to do a demonstration of the way to look at a patient, or the way we have looked at a patient. And we'll start off by looking at the body types. And we'll go through it very quickly, and then we'll spend a little bit more time. Because the body types, the important thing about body types is they represent the constitution of a person, and therefore their genetic makeup. And therefore you can predict the type of person who's going to get heart problems, the person who's going to get the cancers, the person perhaps who will get the diabetes, etc., before you've even started actually treating the person. So I need a volunteer to be a patient. You want to, Sally? Excellent. So the first thing we look at with Sally, we don't actually, we're not looking at you walking. Sorry, carry on. We're just looking at how tall she is, aren't we? Okay. So do you still work in inches?
No.
No, I know you don't.
In meters.
In meters. You don't know what inches are? 7 foot something. Oh, really? I know you're a Dane, but you live in Denmark. 173. So I think, yeah, she's quite tall. I think she's about 5'8", don't you? Something like that. Right. Slip your shoes off if you wouldn't lie on your back. So this is the first thing I tend to do with any patient when we first examine, is to find out a little bit about their body type. So we use the 3 prime colours here. Now remember, the 3 prime colours are red, green and blue. So let's take this one up to here. So we take a strong muscle. We're going to use the rectus femoris a fair bit today. Pull the knee to the shoulder. But tomorrow we're going to be looking at some different muscles more associated with the heart. Okay? But I'll just introduce that with you today. So rectus femoris, pull to the shoulder is fine. Now if you remember, I tap the opposite patellar reflex to see that the muscle becomes inhibited, which it does. And that means there's no major big structural spinal problem interfering with that reflex. Okay, so she's working very well. So no particular order, but I always do red, green and blue it in that order. So let's see. So she could be red, but she's not. She could be green. Greens, remember, are from her way, but you weren't born in Denmark, are you? No, you're British.
Oh,
but she could have become a Dane, couldn't she? How long have you lived there?
30-something years.
30-something years there. But the good news is she hasn't become a Dane. Everybody we find, or practically everybody around the Baltic Sea there, is a green. They weaken to greens. So we call them Danes, or Scandinavians. So the interesting thing here is she weakens to blue. Now, let's test whether she weakens to blue on the right eye, where she does. And does she weaken to blue on the left? Yes. So she's a blue-blue. But those who've followed the seminars over the last few years will know really she's too tall for a blue. Okay? And she's not the build for a blue. She's... What?
You have a thyroid.
Yes, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay. She's a thinner build. She's too tall for a blue. So blue people tend to be... Doesn't mean they genetically come from the East, but they have the build, similar build to people from the Far East. In other words, they're on the shorter side. But don't call them short. They don't like that. Okay. You just say to people, you might have noticed that some people are tall, some people are sort of in the middle, and some people are a little below the middle. Okay. And you're showing that you're shorter than most people, but which you're not. Okay. So it doesn't make sense, this. Now, we learnt in the last year that people can change, or the year before last now, people can change their body type or constitution from their thinking process. And we're going to get into this in quite more depth tomorrow because of the relationship of the emotions and the heart, etc. But we know when things trouble a person, we actually increase certain stress hormones and we decrease other hormones in the body, and sometimes we gain weight and sometimes we lose weight. We don't usually get taller after skeletal maturity, and we don't usually get shorter until we're really old, but we can get faster and slower metabolic rates, etc., and change our body shape. And this is caused primarily through our emotions, and those emotions are governed by the programs which we run in the subconscious mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the right subconscious mind, or amygdala is the main central area of that cornea, on the greater wing of the sphenoid on the right to the left. Okay, remember it's a comparison of the right brain to the left. The right brain being the more intuitive, remember, and the left brain being the more logical. Okay? So now let's do the left brain to the right. And there we see we have a conflict. So with Sally, there's a bit of conflict between her left brain and her right brain. Okay? So her right brain saying one thing and her left brain saying no. Usually the right brain is the positive one. It's the one who has all the ideas and the great ideas to do that. And the left brain says, no, you haven't got enough money or you haven't got the wherewithal to do it. And it tends to be a little bit on the negative side. Okay? So there's a conflict. So what we found is we need to correct this, at least to get started, because she's not really a blue. So she's going to behave like a blue in many ways. She would probably weaken to dairy, and particularly lactose in it. And she would probably be highly sensitive to mercury. You know, these are key issues, aren't they? She might even develop migraine headaches and become sensitive to tyramine foods because she's become a blue. And she might even not be able to tolerate alcohol very well.
I don't drink very much.
She doesn't drink very much. Blue people, as you know, don't tolerate alcohol very well, so they don't tend to drink much, or they don't drink alcohol at all sometimes because they just don't.
Funny, I like it less and less.
She's liking it less and less. The more blue she's becoming. Okay. Now, we don't know, but she definitely wasn't. Really, she probably wasn't born a blue, but sometimes people do change their body constitutions really young. And I think if they change their body constitutions because of their emotional side when they're growing, they can actually grow tall. Say a naturally blue person turned into a green person for whatever reason, and they could actually get tall and then still be, really, they could be a blue. But they become a green because of their emotional side. And we'll look at what those emotions are as we go along. But what we've got to do first of all is to fix this. So I'll need a torch. Could I have a torch from over there? So we know that the optimal way of treating this is to use light therapy. And in the olden days we used to use a light box, thank you. But now we use the Miron light, which you're all familiar with. Okay, so remember we've got to have a point of reference. So she continues to therapy localize the left greater wing and the right greater wing. And we expose the tummy button and pop the torch on for 1 minute. So I've got a watch here, that's good. So we do it for 1 minute. Anything more than a minute does no harm, but anything less than a minute might not work. Okay. Now, what this does is it puts a very healing light into the body. And what we're aiming to try and do is establish a harmony between the left and the right hemispheres, so they're talking together instead of arguing. Okay. And this is what life is all about. If you get harmony between the left and the right, then you're at peace. And people who meditate try and achieve this and let their brain settle and their mind settle. And when they settle completely and they get into that meditation, that's the colour that they see. So people say, oh, I know that colour, because you don't see this colour in nature, but you can actually see it in your mind when you're in a very relaxed, harmonious situation. Nearly there. So we use the umbilicus because that's in Chinese medicine is called the shrine of God. This is where energy or qi goes into the body. You can use the eyes, but you'd have to have a torch on each eye to do it simultaneously. It works very well through the tummy button. Okay, so if you keep your therapy localization there, and we now find that she's nice and strong. Okay, so now we take those away and we go back, open your eyes to the blue. And she's now strong to the blue. So the question now is she a green? Sometimes people are half, remember one and half the other, aren't they? They weaken to one colour over one eye and one over the other. And we call those hybrids. So Sally is a red. Now if we go there, so she's a red on the right now and a red on the left, should be. Okay. So that is her true body type. And as you know from a red, they are dominated or coordinated. The central coordinating gland is the thyroid gland. So everything that goes wrong with her will relate around the thyroid, in other words, around her metabolic rate. And we'll see tomorrow in particular that the three organs, the thyroid with the reds and the adrenals with the greens and the gonads with the blues, all reflect wonderfully into the heart. They all have a function in the heart. They speed the metabolic rate up, or in other words, the heart rate's up, or they decrease the blood pressure, and you can pick all these up with the valve sounds or the force of the contraction of the heart itself, which depends upon the testosterones, etc. Okay, so that's where we got to with her at the moment, right? Now, next stage, we can say to ourselves, well, bearing in mind, she could be a bit sensitive to wheat. Okay, now, could you get a piece of white bread from the kitchen? They might have stopped, but see if you can swipe some white bread and a little bit of that nice whole grain, and we'll see how we get on there. Okay. Now, are there any foods or anything that you know that you're sensitive to?
I don't tolerate wheat very well.
She doesn't tolerate wheat very well. Okay, so this is more typical of the red. Although I think she probably wouldn't have tolerated milk when you were a blue in your other incarnation.
I don't really drink it.
You don't really drink it?
No, but I used to drink raw milk.
Yeah, you used to drink raw milk. Wonderful stuff, yeah.
Um,
People who drink raw milk don't get arthritis, which is interesting, isn't it? It contains a substance in there, a phytosterol, which you don't get in pasteurised, which is destroyed during the pasteurisation. And so drinking raw milk is very good for people with arthritis, and which, you know, Pottinger pointed out in that. Okay, so what we want to do now is we can sum up and say, at this particular stage, she could have a problem with grains. What else do you think about with a red person? They probably got ApoE4 gene expression of the lipoprotein.
I have it on one.
You have it on one. And this predisposes them to more cardiovascular diseases. So she's a great choice for me to use because we'll be itching to look at her heart. And so we may be thinking about high homocysteine, need for extra homocysteine nutrients, such as things, vitamin B6, B12s, folics, etc. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move on now and see where her imbalances are. This is the way we tend to treat patients. We want to find out what's wrong with you now, what's out of balance. So what we're going to do is we're going to see which brain is working and which is not working. So we're going to challenge her right brain by getting her to hum, but she hums a tune that she doesn't know. It's just something around the house or garden, aimlessly, you know. Okay, so she's nice and strong to that, which means her right brain at the moment is working better. Now, therefore, by default, it will be her left brain which will be down. Okay? Now, you don't have to do what we're about to do, because by default, it must be the left brain. Okay? But we'll get her to take 100 minus 3. So take 3 away from 100. 97. And another 3?
90 something.
Okay. 90 something. Okay. Okay.
94.
Most people, they sweat. So you can see the sympathetic nerve activity when you say we're going to do a bit of maths. And they think you're going to count from 10 backwards, but when you say 100 minus 3s, and then, you know, they go, and then you know that they're right-brainers. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is that most of our patients are right-brainers. Most of our patients are thinkers and more holistic. They see the big picture of things. They're not linear, left-brain, logical type of people, and nor are we as practitioners. Okay? You do find a certain percentage, but you won't find that many. So don't be too surprised if people tend to weaken with the same combination of left to right, right to left, and that the predominant weak side will be the left one. Okay, now are we all right for vision on there, Gary? Okay, so on the assumption that this is the left brain, because she weakens to mathematics, okay, left brain equates with yin. Okay, left brain are feminine. Okay, the logical people in this world are females, not males. Okay? I know people will argue about that, particularly in the West, but left brain is yin in Chinese medicine, right brain is yang. Okay? Therefore, her first diagnostic entry is going to be a yin meridian, and all yin meridians begin or end on the trunk, except the governor vessel, which we're going to count as a yin, on the top lip. So let's go for the top lip first. Oh, I see, lovely, that picture in picture there. Okay. Right, so do we now do the kidney? And we'll do the lung. Okay, now, I'm going to jump now to the liver. Okay, so, what?
No, it's just a bit soft.
Oh, it's a bit sore.
No, it's okay.
Liver, and then we'll do the spleen, which is in the, it's into space. Okay, now we do the heart. Heart's right at the top there. So let's just confirm that of the heart on the other one, right at the top. So she's showing up positive to the heart meridian. This is looking better for me all the time now. So we've got a person with a heart meridian. So the first thing you say with a heart meridian is, it's not your heart, don't worry about it, because immediately people think it's an error. It's something to do with what the heart does. The heart meridian corresponds to the physiological function of the heart, which is to pump circulation round. Okay? And this is where we can go very nicely into the heart, which we'll do a bit later. Okay? Now you notice I didn't do the circulation sex on that particular side. I kept that one to last, because if the heart meridian shows up, one of the most common causes of heart problem is valvular disease. And if you touch on the circulation sex meridian, you may be therapy localizing near a valve of the heart. So my suggestion is jump the circulation sex or pericardium meridian there until you've done the heart, and then do that one last, okay? Because you will find 80%, as we discussed tomorrow, of heart lesions are valvular in origin, 80%. Okay? So therefore, we've got 4 sets of valves. Any one of those could be at fault, or all of them. Okay? But I'm not saying that is the case in you. Okay? But I might have inadvertently picked that up as a circulation sex and thought, oh, she's got a circulation sex on. So always check on the other side, and then you could be sure, because you haven't got 2 hearts. We hope. Okay. Never met anyone. I met a few people in my time who've got right-sided hearts, but never one with 2. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we want to work out what it is that's actually wrong with her, isn't it? So let's put the therapy localization onto the heart meridian, keep her in there. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take her through the eye position. So first of all, eyes to the left. So do it 4 or 5 times, the habituation, if you remember, when you repeat it neurologically. And then eyes to the left and up. So eyes to the left was for toxicity. Follow the finger, you're not... When they don't follow your finger, they're not thinking, they're thinking of something else. So eyes to the left and up is nutrition, which she shows positive to. And then eyes to the left and down is structure. Eyes to the right and down is allergy or intolerance. Eyes to the right is exercise. Eyes to the right and up is usually dehydration, but it's Lorraine here. Lorraine Gibbons. Lorraine Gibbons and some other practitioners rather feel that this might be more to do with pH than just dehydration, and because they find that they often respond to the tissue salts and things, the different elements, and some of those tissue salts are chlorides and some are phosphates, and it could be something to do with changing the pH, so it may be just not totally dehydration. And then round and round. So remember, what we're looking for is what changes her from weakness, because she's touching the heart meridian, into what makes her go strong. So the 6 basic ones that we did were all taken from neuro-linguistic programming positions. These are 2 which I added on, which is the circumduction for infections, and then up and down is for hypoxia. And we find that probably 80-90% of people who show to the heart are hypoxic. In other words, that's the main nutrient that the heart pumps round. But in Sally's case, that's not the case. So we're not picking up on hypoxia at the moment. So could I have an original kit, a Genesis kit? So Frederick, we want something which has got the composites in first. So the quick way nutrition, we know that Sally at this stage needs something from a nutritional point of view. Thanks. And then we'll need a product kit. So the best way, or the easiest way, but nothing is ever 100%, but this will give us some clues, is to go for the major nutrients. And I would say probably the major nutrients are vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fats, particularly the unsaturated fats, and probably probiotics and coenzymes. So in no particular order, let's have a look. We've got minerals. So she doesn't strengthen to minerals. I'm explaining to the patient as I go along here, the minerals are things like zinc and magnesium, and then they answer. Unsaturated fatty acids and oils, which would be your flax, etc. And then we've got probiotics. Very important probiotics. And then we've got coenzymes. Pull, pull, pull. These are mostly activated vitamin Bs, but there are a few other ones which we'll be looking at. Vitamins as such were just straight raw vitamins, which he strengthens to very nicely. And amino acids. So it's looking like a vitamin. So what we'll do now is we'll have a look at some of the vitamins. The chances are has this one got wheat germ oil in? Do you know? Has it got wheat germ oil somewhere in there? I'll do the fat-soluble vitamins first. Can you hunt Jane down and find out where she's put it? Okay, so let's do the fat-soluble vitamins first. So vitamin A. Vitamin A comes up quite a lot with people. We'll be talking about that later. And then we've got vitamin C, which is not a fat-soluble vitamin. Sorry, I took it out. Just keep you on your toes, that's all. Okay, vitamin D, which you shouldn't have any need for vitamin D at the moment. Highly surprising. But vitamin D is a good time. We'll reassess patients with vitamin D about November, about sort of half term coming into November, when they've gone a few months without any sunshine. Okay, so we've just got to do E, which is coming up. Right, so now what we do is we will do thiamine, vitamin B1, we'll do riboflavin, 5-phosphate, and we'll do niacin, so B1, 2 and 3. Is that the wheat germ? Okay, fabulous. Okay, so let's see. We'll just do wheat germ. We use wheat germ, and I'll explain why a little bit later on for vitamin E. Okay, so let's do vitamin B1, vitamin B2, and vitamin B3. Now, I'm going to be talking over the weekend quite a lot about vitamin B1 and B2, 3, because they have opposite effects. B1 is a vasoconstrictor and very much a nerve tonic. B2 and B3 are vasodilators. So this is all the difference in the world, isn't it? So if you've got a heart problem, it's very important, do you vasoconstrict or do you vasodilate? I think most of you vasodilate, wouldn't you? You'd rather, which is going to be the B2, B3. So you keep B1 really low, otherwise you'll get a constriction, particularly of the coronary vessels. So before B5 we need next, and then good old B6. So B5, and pull. So we got positive on B6. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Are you thinking, isn't that something to do with homocysteine that I was just talking about? She's a red, she's fitting into that pattern already. So we just finish off on the vitamins and do folic acid. And folic acid isn't really a vitamin. Folic acid has to be activated to become a vitamin. Folic acid itself is inert, so sometimes it doesn't show up with people because people aren't deficient in folic acid, but they might be deficient in the tetrahydrofolates, the methanol, the methylene and the methyl tetrahydrofolates. Now the beauty of that is that all those activations are activated by zinc. So when you put folic acid, always check it with zinc. You can check it on its own first of all, but if you want to screen all the different types of folate coenzymes, try with folic acid first of all on its own, and then folate with zinc, and that covers you for all the activated forms. So this is why we now do a product called folic acid with zinc in equal portions. At the moment it's a liquid, we may consider doing it as a capsule, but it will cover you for what used to be called folinic acid or methanol, methylene and methyl. So all those activated forms, all you need simply is basically folic acid with zinc, but you don't need it anyway. Right? So if you're using, let's say, something like a prenatal formula, and you want to increase the folic acid, then you should always have zinc with it. So hydroxycobalamin, again, doesn't do it, which is your B12. So you're a B6 girl. Okay? So we won't go into the amount at this stage, but you know how you measure the amount by now. You put it in the glass if you're using a liquid. Okay, the amount to negate the therapy localization. And then we do the stomach and the small intestine and the circulation sex times to see which is the optimal time. All right? So I'm going to just do the B6 here. So let's leave the B6 on. Okay, so I'm just leaving the file on at the moment. So she's staying nice and strong. So we're cross-therapy localized now to the stomach meridian, which is breakfast time. That's 8 till 10. She's nice and strong. And then we're cross-checked to small intestine time, which is 2 till 4. That's lunch time. And then we'll do circulation sex, which is the evening meal, 8 till 10. So she's showing only to the one time, which is stomach time, which is breakfast time. Okay? Remember, these times alter at the end of the month, end of October, when the clocks go back. Okay? So she will then take it between 7 and 9 rather than 8 till 10. Okay? So she's in then more standard time. Okay, that's good. Okay. Now, our next question is, only nutrition showed up, didn't it? Is that the only thing that she needs for her left brain? This is the number one question, isn't it? Is that the only thing that she needs? Yes, it was the only one of the composites that showed up. It was the only eye position that showed up. But we don't know. And we've tried various ways of now finding out whether that is the best way or not. We've tried therapy localizing in the umbilicus. We've tried putting a black acetate over to lower the energy. But something that Frederick and I worked out, which is very good, is to just tap conception vessel 22, which is the point for the corpus callosum on the brain. And you just tap it very firmly, like that. Okay? That's usually enough. Tell the patient what you're doing there, otherwise they think you're beating them up. Okay? So that remains strong. If that goes weak, we know there's something else in there. Okay? So it just jolts the left and right brain activity. That means if we fixed up the left brain with you, you can take your hand away. Okay? What we've done is the left brain is down. Now we built that up. We should find the right brain shows us now what's going on. Okay? So go back. We've got no therapy localizations on in any way. You've got the B6. Without the B6, we won't find what's going wrong with the right brain. You see, we've fixed the pressing. Now, what we found generally over the years is that the first side that shows up, whether it's the left or the right, is the presenting symptoms with the patient. Okay? So what Sally will complain of will be related to B6 deficiency. Okay? We haven't asked her what, but we'll fit all that in a moment. Okay? So the second side, which is going to show up, and in this case it's going to be the right brain, is more the cause. So one side is more the effect, what you see with the patient. You know, they may have an illness at that time, they may be sick, or they could have pain, they could have skin spots or whatever. Whatever it is manifesting will be on the first side. In other words, that's what the body is showing. Okay? The second side really to us is the more important, because that's the fundamental key underneath as the cause. All right? So now we're going to do that. So let's just hum, but not a tune that you know, remember? Now she goes completely weak to humming. So remember, she only goes weak because we've got the B6 up, because we fixed her left brain, we brought that up to threshold, okay? And now the right brain is relatively down. It hasn't changed, of course, but it's working less than the left brain. It's all relative, okay? So the right brain is the intuitive one. That's why she composed that beautiful piece of music which we just heard. Okay. Now, so we go for the yang meridians. These all begin and end on the face, so we start, it doesn't matter which order, but we do conception vessel. Okay. Now, most of you are probably whizzing in your minds and saying, conception vessel, that equates with low levels of dopamine, doesn't it? Okay. Then we do large intestine, which equates with low levels of the inhibitory neurotransmitters. Then we do bladder in the corner of the eye, which equates with low serotonin. Stomach 1, which equates with low histamine. Gallbladder 1, which is low acetylcholine. Ooh, do that on the other side. Gallbladder, this is great, isn't it? We've got heart on one side and fat metabolism on the other side. You're looking good. Okay, so triple warmer. Okay, that's to do with excitatory neurotransmitter, and lastly, small intestine on the temporal mandibular joint, which is low noradrenaline. So we're looking now as though we've got a gallbladder. Okay? So gallbladder, everything about the gallbladder, it's low acetylcholine, but it always relates to fat metabolism. Okay, always remember that. There's a problem with oils or fats here. Okay, doesn't matter which one it is, but there's a problem. Okay, so now what we do is we do the same thing, eyes to the left and hup, eyes to the left and hup, eyes to the left and hup. Okay, so she doesn't strengthen to nutrition. Eyes to the left across, so we're looking for toxins. Eyes to the left and down. Sometimes structure comes up at this point. Eyes to the right and down. Pull, okay. Right and across for exercise. Right and up for dehydration. Round and round we go. And round the other way. Okay, and then up and down. Now, if you get to the end of all these positions and nothing strengthens, which up and down does with her, then I would suggest you do inspiration and expiration, because often you've got a cranial fault in there. Okay? But it's not a mechanical problem in the spine, because that would have showed up in the position to the left and down. But it can be sometimes a cranial compression. But we're lucky here, it's up and down. And up and down means what? Hypoxia. So it means a lack of oxygen, which we'll be talking about later. Now, there is a checklist I just do routinely. I do iron first, and then I do the 3 types of B12. So I do iron, and what iron does, it tells me basically if the hemoglobin is all right, which it is. Okay, and then we'll do adenosylcobalamin, one of the active forms of B12, and then we'll do methylcobalamin, the other activated form, and we'll do hydroxycobalamin. Okay, so we can say probably that red cells are mature, which is good. Okay, so where do we go next? This is really, really very important because it shows up with a lot of people. So my suggestion, probably in the way that we find it, the next one is vitamin C. And vitamin C is more C complex rather than straight ascorbic acid, as we'll see, because the other components of C are really important. In other words, the bioflavonoids and the tyrosine enzymes are all part of making getting the oxygen across the blood vessel walls. So that's all right. Now we know it's gallbladder. So gallbladder has already told us it's probably fats, isn't it? So we use the oils, okay, because we've got to get the oxygen from the red cell in the capillary across the membrane of the red cell, across the membrane of the capillary, across the membrane of the cell the oxygen is going to be delivered to, okay, and across the mitochondrial membrane to get the oxygen into the mitochondria to be burned. Right? So we've got a lot of membranes to get across, and those membranes have all got to be harmonious, because if they're all made of different fats and they're full of trans fats and hardened oils, rancid oils and so on, we won't get them across. So the oils are really, really important. So we go through our routine 9 or 10 oils. So flax, and we've got a wonderful new oil to our range, which cures everything, apparently. And everybody will want that later, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, there's always a new oil out, isn't there? But this one really is good. Okay, sorry, I'll do the ones I say. Flaxseed, sesame seed, hazelnut. There's no particular order, but I'm just going through there to see which ones you need. Hemp seed oil, that is. Grape seed oil. And peanut oil. Pumpkin seed oil. Olive. You strengthen nicely to olive. Now, if you know your oils, some of you know your oils and the body types. Olive is a red oil, a red person's oil. But on the right brain, which we're working on, olive is the only oil that shows. In other words, you don't perhaps need all the other oils at the moment, but olive is the good one, okay? Again, we work out the dose by putting it in a glass. Remember what time is always evening time, isn't it, for oils? So we'll just cross-check that. Circulation second is always the time for oils in the diet. If we go for breakfast, breakfast is not a good time to have oils. You wouldn't want a slug of olive oil for breakfast, would you? Or really very much for lunch. You can have it, but you know, if you don't like drinking olive oil, making mayonnaise, making salad dressings and things, or putting it on your food, make a mayonnaise. That's the best way. Most people love.
olive oil.
You love olive oil. That's good, and it loves you. But get a decent one. Okay. So the decent one has to be what?
Cold pressed.
Cold pressed
Extra virgin.
and extra virgin and organic.
And organic.
And organic, very important. Cold pressed is nonsense. All olive oil is cold pressed. Okay. No olive oil goes through a heating process in the extraction. Okay. It's all cold pressed. Okay. I didn't know. Even cheap is cold pressed because it's not a seed. It's the flesh. Okay. The heating comes from when you heat the seeds up in the press and the friction. But with olive oil, the word of cold pressed actually doesn't mean anything. What really matters more than anything else is whether that oil is fresh and whether it's organic. And there's one other real good criteria which we need to talk at, very, very important as we go along, and we'll be talking about that today, is whether that oil is rancid. And I'm going to show you how you can test whether the oil is rancid. Because at the end of the day, a friend of mine, Eric Perotti in Australia, he has hundreds of olive trees. He grew all these hundreds of olive trees for his retirement. And he's coming up towards that time when he said, "What are you going to do, Eric?" He said, to tell you the truth, the garden's getting a bit big now. I might sell up, which is a pity because he's built all these olive trees. And he teaches me all about olive. He said, at the end of the day, I said, "How do you sell your olives? You know, what's the price on them?" And he said, "Well, at the end of the day, they turn the olives into oil, and at the end of the day, it's the taster who does it. He says that is worth so much money. Okay, that is worth it. Just like tea. Okay, there is no standard way of saying that olive because it's grown there. But judging by they measure the pH, they measure the oxidation in there, whether the thing is rancid. But at the end of the day, it's the smell and the taste. Okay, and that's what determines the price. So I'm going to teach you how to determine whether Sally's having the wrong type of olive oil. She may be having good oil. She's got the right oil with the olive oil, but is it the best of oils? Because again, oils should always be in dark bottles, shouldn't they? Okay, as we come on, they should be in black glass or they should be in tin. Okay, they should not be in clear bottles. You'll notice the clear bottles in the supermarkets are the cheap ones. Okay, you can buy olive oil for £3 for a litre almost in cheap ones, and it can be organic. Okay, wonderful. But it's had the light going through it, and the light is the main source of oxidation. So is olive oil the only thing that you need? Okay, so how do we determine that? Give her a tap on the chest again. Okay. Fantastic. So we've got something we can send her off with. So you have 3 spoonfuls, we can say, with your evening meal of olive oil, okay, and whatever the dose was of B6. Okay, so that's your prescription for today, all right? Let's just out of interest, because she's read, let's see what happens with the bread. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some white bread on you, okay, and I'm going to talk to your right brain here, and now I'm going to talk to your left brain. Interesting. So the white bread, the wheat, she's quite right here, weakens on the left brain, but not on the right. Okay. So if you had only tested the wheat on this side, you'd say, no, you're fine with wheat. Okay. So it depends on which of the afferents or the input from the sensory receptors goes to the brain, of which side processes this. So in your case, it's the left brain. So if we've gone to the right, as I said that was okay, and on the left brain says, no way, Jose. Okay. Now, let's try the good stuff, okay? So the fresh wholemeal. Was it, is Jill there? Jill, is that spelt or is that whole grain? That's ordinary wheat, okay, everyday wheat, okay? Isn't that interesting? She stays strong to that. I haven't yet found anybody weaken to whole grain wheat. They can be highly wheat sensitive, but if you can put whole grains on them, they don't weaken. Okay? What they weaken to is flour, because people don't eat whole grains. What they say is, oh, I can't eat bread. And they're quite right, they can't. They weaken. They say, why? Because it's rancid. Okay? It's old flour. How do you know how old your flour is? You know, Royal Lee talks extensively. Flour should not be kept more than 4 weeks in the winter, and 1 week in the summer. You should keep it in the fridge if you have it milled, but not in the freezer. If you put it in the freezer, the vitamin E decreases rapidly. And as we'll learn, it's the vitamin E that protects the oils within the germ. Okay? Now, once that vitamin E has become oxidized itself, it can't be replaced, and then the oils become rancid. And this is when you suddenly get that turnaround period, somewhere between 1 week and 4 weeks, when the oil goes rancid, and that's when the flour smells. Okay? Now, if you refine and take the germ out, and then you find that you've taken the bran off as well, there's no goodness apart from just the endosperm or the starch. Even the insects and the weevils won't attack that. Okay? They like the whole grain, and that's one of the reasons. To extend the shelf life, they took the germ out because it stops it from going rancid. But I've discovered many things about, by asking a few questions in the right granaries, what actually happens. Not only do they fumigate grain, okay, to take out bugs and things in there, but this guy from a well-known organic flour distributor told me, he said, do you know, Chris, he said that they add calcium to all flour, has to be, and he said they add fluoride, okay, to all flour in this country. Every single company, organic, non-organic, has fluoride added to it. I said, no. I said, it doesn't say that on the pack. He said, it doesn't have to say it on the pack. It was legislation brought in 10 to 11 years ago. All flour in this country has fluoride in it. And I said, well, what happens if I get whole grain? He said, you've got free, no fluorides, no additives, nothing. He said, we don't fumigate, we put no bleaches or anything else in, you just get whole grain. Okay, and that's what you're about to taste. Hopefully, how's she buttering out now? Okay, now, what he told me was that the modern grains have been bred to make bigger ears, to make bigger grains, and they now have many more chromosomes than they used to. I think, I'm not quite sure, but don't quote me on this, but he measured something like 40, he told me. So that it has in the proteins, in other words, the gluten, there are now 40 chromosomes, which encode, of course, with their genes for a load of proteins. So not only would there be perhaps 40 proteins, but there could be 400 or more, because we're talking about chromosomes, not genes here. Each chromosome has no end of genes in it. So in other words, there's loads more proteins in modern wheat, something like 40. Spelt, which is the old one, which they used to use for thatching, and they still do use for thatching, which probably is synonymous with, you call it dinkel wheat, I think, but we call it spelt over here, has 30 chromosomes. But the old wheat, the very old wheat, the einkorn wheat and the kamut wheat from the pyramids only had 20. Okay? So in other words, the amount of proteins, the genes, and he said that's why people are very much more sensitive to wheat, he said, these days, because they reckon it's the proteins which create the allergic reactions and create the immunoglobulin reactions. If you use the older wheats, this is why some people can tolerate spelt much better than modern wheats, but they've introduced einkorn, which was the original one that they buy it in from Kazakhstan, but it was actually grown over here in Berkshire, and they found it in a thatch in a house. And when the thatchers were taking, they recognized that this straw was a different type of straw, and they took it to be analyzed, and it was einkorn, which was the original wheat from the Middle East, long before the modern wheats came in. And they also discovered kamut, which was the original wheat buried with the pharaohs in the pyramids. And when they unearthed some of these tombs, they found the wheat for the afterlife of the pharaoh, and they grew it. And it grew. After 5,000 years, the wheat grew, and they've bred it ever since, and it's called kamut. And he said, you know the great thing about kamut? He said, it's rich in selenium. It's the richest source of selenium. Yeah. So you'll see that, but unfortunately, you can only buy kamut and einkorn flour. You can't get the whole grain at the moment, so I'm working on that. He says you can have it if you buy a metric tonne, which is 1,000 kilograms. Well, that would probably fill my garage up and wouldn't be very popular. But it'll come, you know, when they do whole grain. And the older wheats are much more tolerant. And what we found here, that was actually modern wheat for bread making, but it's not rancid. That was milled yesterday and changed into dough within 10 minutes of milling. So that's quick, so it had no time to go rancid at all. Cooked, and then you've had the first slice. You haven't eaten it, everybody else is about to eat it. Right? So that's interesting. So she is sensitive to wheat, and she's sensitive to probably white bread and brown bread, which she instinctively knows. But she's probably all right with actually true wheat. So whole wheat like this, whole wheat sprouted would be fine, whole wheat fresh bread. And you'll find that this is what Alexander conquered half the world on, Egyptian wheat, kamut. Okay? That's all he gave his troops, bread. That's all they had. Okay? And people have lived for, they used to call it the staff of life, wasn't it? Because you could live on that. And as Pottinger showed you, raw milk also contains all the vitamins and minerals, fats and proteins that a person needs. Okay? You can live on milk alone, but not pasteurized. You saw what the pasteurizing did to the cats and the cooked meat. And worst of all, the evaporated and condensed milks. Okay, their bones really deteriorated. And I can remember my parents back in the 1960s, probably with the introduction of condensed milk, when they started moving over to condensed milk and saying this is much better than dairy milk, and putting it in coffee and that sort of thing. And you did as well? Oh, when babies were fed it, yes. And it's laced with sugar. And it's all refined sugar. And refined sugar, like refined bread or flour, has no vitamins in it. Okay? The vitamins are in the husk with the wheat and in the brown of the raw sugar cane. Raw sugar cane, Weston Price found no deterioration to the mouth at all. Put white sugar or refined coloured white sugar, as it's called, in there, and they get dental caries. Okay? But they can survive very well on raw sugar and raw milk. Okay? These are, and good cereal products, and you won't get the degeneration as Pottinger shown. And that would be lovely to do that experiment. It just, you know, to get a cat and just throw it up in the air and see what happens to it. Because I've had cats in the past, and we've created Pottinger's cats. When I saw that film, I knew that you can create a Pottinger's cat within a year. If you get a wild cat who's nice and healthy and catches birds and things and that, and you feed it tinned meat and milk, and they get lethargic, they gain weight, their eyes go, and they're always ill. You know, and I'm sure you've seen them. As I say, Pottinger's cats are our patients, really.